Good day. My name is Michael Mulondo, and I'm going to present on the subject of community-based care and support for the certificate degree, CB10D1. So the purpose of this presentation is to prepare you for the upcoming exam in May, and then also to help you to look at what you might expect, and we call it exam scope. But beside the exam scope, it is still expected from you to know the content of the subjects, and what I mean with the content of the subject, that you have to look at your study manual, you have to look at other materials, and also at a presentation that was made previously also on YouTube on this specific subject. So what I'm going to do is the presentation is actually divided into two sections. The first section is I'm going to share with you some tips, some practical tips that you need to know what is expected from you before you prepare for the exam, and then during the exam when you are going to write the exam. So that will be the first section. Just it's very practical. It's only guidelines, it's tips to help you so that you can make sure that when you are going to write the exams upcoming May, that you will be ready and prepare for it. Then the second section of this presentation is we're going to look at the content of the subject, and I'm going to highlight some of the thematic themes which are very important. I'm going to give you some scope, but it is still expected from you to make sure that you are ready and you are prepared for the exam that's actually upcoming. It's very important to know that many times when students are preparing for exam, they always wait for the last minute or a day before the exam is written. So the reason why we make this presentation is to give you ample time and enough time to prepare yourself. Because at the end of the day, when you are ready and you are prepared and you are familiar with the content of the subjects, it makes it very easier for any students to write an exam, and then also to know what might be expected from the exam. The purpose of this presentation is not, and I want to repeat again, it's not to tell you what will be what you have to learn only. It does not mean that you have to limit yourself to this thematic thing, but what it actually means is it helps you as a guideline just to know what you have to focus on. But at the end of the day, you have to know the whole content of the subject as much as possible, which is very important. So as I go to the first slide, I'm going to look at what you need to do yourself before the exam, and then also what you have to do when you're going to write the exam. The reason I'm giving the steps is because of the last few years of experience, mistakes that many students are making, and there are so many students right now that they don't know what to do before, and they don't know what to do while they are writing or during writing the exams. So these are general guidelines that you can use. It's also very good practical tools that can help yourself just to make sure that you are ready for the exam and what you have to expect yourself. So before the exam, it's very important that at least 2 months before you write the exam, to have a timetable. Now, as you know that your subject or your guideline or your study guide is divided into chapters. So preferably, I will suggest that you have to divide your chapters into weeks. Say every week a chapter. That would be very helpful. Say if you have 10 chapters in your study guide, then it means it is 10 weeks or 10 weeks which you have to prepare. So which means is one chapter in a week that you have to do to make sure. And this timetable is it's tailor-made. You can decide how you want to make it. Some people, they make one chapter over a period of 2 weeks. It all depends on you, because it's very important that when you are going to draw up this timetable, that this timetable will help you to understand, to know and to grasp the content of the subject. So it's very important that you need to have a timetable. And secondly, about the timetable is you have to commit yourself. Many times people have timetables and they find themselves, because of other commitments or other situations, that they deviate from the timetable. So it's very important that you have to stick to your timetable as part of preparation for your exam, because without a timetable it's very the other thing is, what's very interesting is you will always find when people are writing exams, that same day, say the exam is 9 o'clock in the morning, you will see people 8 o'clock already standing there with their books open, wanting to study that time, or they want to wake up the next morning or early in the morning before 12 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning, just 4 hours before the exam, and then they want to start to study themselves. So that's the mistake most students are doing. So it's very important that you give yourself enough time. So as part of your timetable, the first thing that you have to do is, when you are going to follow your timetable, is you first need to read your chapters. You have to read your study guide, and you can also read other resources. And the purpose of reading is you have to read in order to understand the content and also the context of the subject. Many people, they just read for the sake of reading, but they don't have any clue what. And it's very important that while you are reading during this 2 months of period, is you have to make yourself notes. There might be some terminology that you don't understand. There might be some things that words that you don't understand. And from time to time, it means that you need to go to a dictionary just to refer to understand what does those things mean, or what are the keywords. So you create yourself keywords that you write down. And if there are anything that you don't understand, you have to make notes. So these are the time where you read through the chapter and you just read for the sake of understanding. So you don't read to memorize, you read to understand the content of the subject or that specific unit or chapter. And as you are reading, you are making your notes. If there are questions that you have, you can make question marks, and it will always help you that after you've read through the chapters, you can look at alternative resources. You can go to the library and read about that specific chapter, which is very important. So after you have read and you have made your notes, and as I say, the reason of making notes is you are writing those key words within that unit or the chapter, concepts that you don't understand. It's very important. So that's what you're doing. So after you have read through the 10 chapters, for example, over a period of a month, or a period of a month and a half, doesn't matter, it all depends on you. Then the second step that you have to follow is start to revise. Revision actually means is you go back to chapter 1 and you look through your notes. Because your notes, it's very important, and psychologists can also confirm this, that you will understand much better when you write things on a piece of paper, when you write notes or you're making notes, than memorizing it in your brain. So the moment you are writing down your notes from chapter 1 up to chapter 10, for example, so when you go back and you revise, then it's very easy for you to go through your notes. You understand the concept, you understand the keywords in the chapter, and then you will have a better understanding. So, and it's very important that you have to do revision. And I've put that revision so many times, because many people, they read, make their notes, and they don't go through the notes or through what they've actually read. So it's very important. And revision does not mean a week or a day before. It means that even a week before you're going to write your chapter or your subject, it's very important that you must already be finished with your revision. And don't make that mistake. There is a lot of don'ts which I can tell you, and one of them is never ever try to study 24 hours before you're going to write that subject. It is advisable that at least before 24 hours or before 12 hours, 24 hours before you're going to write that subject, just close your books, because you know that you've read through your book, through your subject, you revise yourself and you have an understanding on the content. And it's very important also to make your brain to rest. Now, not all of us are gifted with telegraphic minds to understand or to remember word by word. Some of us, we need to read, we need to understand, we need to study. So it's very important that a day before you write that specific subject, just give yourself time to rest. Go, relax, just relax, refresh yourself, and you will be very surprised that the day that you're going to write your exam, that you will remember everything you've studied for the last 2 months and what you have revised, because the brain is the most powerful organ ever. And you will be so surprised that everything that you have studied it's actually stored up in your brain. Somebody once said if you look at a computer is having a hard drive, and the purpose of a hard drive of the computer is to store all the memories and all the data, so that whenever you need the information, and you can always retrieve the information. And that's the same way how your brain is working. So whatever you read, whatever you study, and you understand, you have the context, you understand the concept, the keywords, it's all stored up in your mind, in your subconscious mind. So the time that you're going to write, and the moment you put that pen on that paper, it's amazing how the brain can recall all the information that you have learned. And of course, it all means that you have a timetable. You have to prepare yourself, and you are actually ready according to or you have been committed to your schedule. So now we're going to look now at during the exam, when you're going to write the exam itself. Now remember, when you are in that examination hall, the only thing that you have is you have time. You've got 3 hours to write this paper. You've got your pen, you've got your script. The first thing that you must do before you do anything is open up that exam paper, and mostly you will find that there are 6 questions on the exam paper, and you are only required to choose one of the 5 or 5 questions out of 6. Now, many times that students, they make this mistake. They, when they get that exam paper and it's time for them to write, they just started to write. They don't read through. They don't know what questions is on that paper. They just start to write. Now, the first thing what you have to do, give yourself 5 to 10 minutes before you're going to write everything. Remember, you've got 2 hours. Some papers you've got 3 hours. So give yourself 10 minutes just to read through the paper. The first thing what you have to do is read through the 6 questions. The purpose of reading through the 6 questions is so that you can understand what the questions are, so that you can understand and not assume this is what the question is. So the first thing is you read through all the 6 questions, so that you know what the questions is all about. So after reading through all the 6 questions, or the questions that's on the exam paper, then the second step what you have to do is you have to select. And this is what I call the priority, to prioritize. Now you will find that there are 6 questions, question 1 up to question 6. And as you read through the question, you will discover that, for example, question 3 is more easier to answer than question 1. So then what you do with your piece of pen, you can even write on the exam paper. It's not a problem. It's allowed. You make yourself a note and you say, question 3 is the easiest question to answer. So you write number 1 on question 3. Then you read through the question paper, and then you find that question 5 is the second easiest question. And so you go on with your list, and at the end of the day, what will help you is, when you remember, you only have 2 hours. Some papers have 3 hours. So within the 2 hours or 3 hours, you have to answer that question paper. So what I will suggest is always start with a question that's the easiest. So that's what we actually recommend students, because you will find yourself that you start with a question that's so difficult, and by answering that question, you will take more time to answer the question. At the end of the day, you find yourself that you have limited time, you have to rush yourself, and by the time you come to the question that you understand, then you are actually already forgot the answers of the other questions. So make yourself, so you select, you prioritize the questions that you know and the question that you can answer easily. So after you have prioritized your question, you know which question you will start with. Then thirdly, what is very important is when you start to answer, say for an example, you have choose question 3. It's very important that you have to write neatly. Write question 3, because whoever's going to mark the script will know this is question 3. So don't make question 3 question 1. So write on your exam script very clearly what number the question is. So you're going to say, for an example, you start with question 3 because it's the easiest question. You write question 3 very clearly. Then what you have to do is, number 3, is you have to read the question. Read the question so that you can understand what the question is. Very important. And step number 4, after you've read the question, answer the question. Don't interpret the question. The mistake that most students are doing is when they get a question, for an example, the question says, for an example, list the various home-based care services or programs that you find. Now, it says list, so it's very important that when you're going to read your question, it's always circle the verbs. That's the other thing I can also tell you. Say if the question is list the various services that are being provided in home-based care. It does not say name, it says list. Some questions say discuss the various services that are being offered in home-based care. So which means the question does not say list, it says discuss. Now, which is very important. So when you read the question, then you will know, does the question require you to only list the answer, or does it require you to discuss the question, or does it say differentiate and expand, and does it also say give practical examples? So when it says give practical example, it's very important that for everything that you're going to write, you have to give practical examples. So it's very important that during the exam that you have to answer the question. Don't interpret. Don't assume this is what the question is all about. So make sure that you understand. And what is also important, when you start to write the question, you must also look at the marks. Now, some question you have different kinds of questions in your exam paper. You've got short questions where it's only, say, 5 marks. You've got questions that are only 10 marks, and then you've got long answer questions, which is 20 marks. So just remember, is you cannot expect when it is asked in the exam paper, discuss, for example, the various home-based care services. It does not say you must list. So when it says discuss and you say it's 20 marks, then you must assume at least that you cannot write less than a half page. At least write 1.5 pages, or 2 pages if it's necessary, or even 3 pages. The more you will write, the more you will ensure that whoever is going to examine or going to mark your question will make sure that you will get the marks. So it's very important to put more information on it. The other mistake that most students are doing during the exam is when they see, they don't even look at the marks or how much mark it is, they just write. And some of them, when it's a 20 mark page or question, then they only write half a page, and then they expect from a half a page 20 marks. It is not possible. So make sure that you select the right question, you read the question, and then you answer the question, which is very, very important. So those are the tips that you have to look at and that you have to do before you write the exams, and then also during when you're going to write the exam paper. The other thing about the exam paper is to make sure that when you are going to write on the exam script, make sure that your student number, your name and your surname are correct. You have some students that they write wrong student, their student number is totally wrong and it does not match up with the surname. So make sure, as I say, the bottom line is try to write very neatly, very clear, so that whoever is going to mark your question will be able to read your question. So we're going to go now to the second section of this presentation, and we're going to look now at the scope of the exam and what you have to look at and what you have to look at. So it's very important, as I said earlier, that you have to understand the whole content of the subject. So don't just focus on the scope, but also look at the whole. It's very important that you understand the whole subject. So there is a number of themes that I'm going to bring up for the next 10 minutes or 5 to 10 minutes about what you can expect and what you have to prepare for your exam. The first thing is you need to understand home-based care. What is home-based care? You need to be able to define what home-based care is. And secondly is you have to look at the different programs that are being presented when it comes to home-based care. What packages? Remember what what I presented a few months ago on the subject when we look at our assignment. I also mentioned some of the aspects about home-based care program. So it's very important for you to understand, number one, what is home-based care? Number two is what programs does home-based care entails or consist of? And then thirdly, it's very important to know what programs does Namibia present as a country when it comes to home-based care. Also look at what other programs have been present in other SADC countries, for example, in South Africa, in Botswana, Mozambique, Zambia, what kind of programs. So it's very important for you to understand the whole concept of home-based care, because the moment you understand the concept, it will help you then also to answer any other question that's going to be asked during the exam. The second thing that you have to look at, health centers are very important. And when I'm talking about health centers, I'm talking about hospitals, I'm talking about clinics, I'm talking about any building or institution that provide health services to communities and also to individuals. So you have to understand within the health centers, what role does home-based care play? And what role does health centers play, for example, hospitals, when it comes to referral? Somebody comes to the hospital or to the clinic for HIV testing. Their status are being they've been informed by their status, and at the end of the day they discover themselves they're HIV positive. So, and this is where you have to also understand that your clinics, your health centers, your hospitals play a very important role when it comes to referral services. And it's very important for you to understand what the referral services and systems does health centers have. Then thirdly, what you have to look at is you have to look at the caregivers themselves, the community caregivers. And in my past presentation, you can go through it, and even through your study guide, you will find out that many of these community caregivers are actually volunteers. So you have to understand what are their roles, what are their responsibility as caregivers, what experiences do they have as caregivers, what challenges do they have as caregivers. It's very important for you to understand. You have the programs, you've got the packages, and you have got people that implement those programs, and this is where those individuals that volunteer themselves. So it's important that you have to know who are the caregivers, what are they doing, what is their purpose, what challenges do they experience, and what problems do they experience. And also look at other success stories from other countries, best practices when it comes to home-based care and caregivers themselves. How are they being recruited? You have to look at Namibia itself, at the National Home-Based Care Policy. What does the Namibian National Home-Based Care Policy talk about? What does it entail? You need to have an understanding. So I will suggest that you have to go and look at the National Home-Based Care Givers Policy of Namibia. Then fourthly is when it comes to home-based care and programs, there are different infrastructures. What are these infrastructures, for example? You can look, the first one, you can look, one of the infrastructures which is very important is the hospitals, for example. What other infrastructures do you also have? The ambulance services. within the community, what infrastructures are there when it comes to the different programs of home-based care. So it's very important for you to have an understanding and to read through the infrastructures of home-based care and as it is presented in a community or in a nation. Then, of course, which is very important when you work with home-based caregivers, you're working with people living with HIV/AIDS, and you're also looking at infections. How are you going to prevent prevention, and why is preventing transmission of infection very important in home-based care? So discuss about this infection, what possible infections can be there, how are these infections transmitted, and how can you prevent it when it comes to home-based care. Then the other aspect in home-based care is you have to look at the whole issue of stigma and discrimination. The difference about stigma and also what discrimination is about, especially for people living with HIV/AIDS. Those that are infected and living openly with the disease and even known by family and friends. And very important, we've talked about self-stigmatization, where you stigmatize yourself as a person. So how do you deal as a home-based caregiver to help somebody that's stigmatized themselves? Self-discrimination, you are discriminating yourself. You feel that you are worse off, that you are nothing. How do you deal with people that are being discriminated by their family, by their friends? So these are something that you have to look at. And then lastly, but not all, is the whole thing of monitoring and evaluation. When you are going to implement a home-based care program within a community, how are you going to monitor those implementation on a daily, on a monthly? If it's a one-year program, how are you going to make sure that this program or these activities are going to be implemented? And this is where you need to have a monitoring system, whether it's report writing, supervision, a field inspection. It's very important that you have to make sure that you've got a monitoring system in place. And then evaluation is after a year or after the project has been implemented. It's how are you going to evaluate the impact of this program? So it's very important that you need to understand, because impact assessment, which is part of evaluation, will help the program to be improved in the future, and then also to look at gaps, and then also at best practices. So these are the my presentation, and I hope all the best for the exam. So as I said, follow the 2 months program timetable, prepare yourself as I have presented, and I know that you will be able to pass the exam with distinction. And thank you very much for listening to me. Goodbye.